Okay, so let's look at another method to solving a quadratic equation. And this is, we're going to use what we call the quadratic formula. And so this technique is helpful, especially for um, quadratic equations where the answer isn't always a pretty nice whole number, okay, or a pretty nice integer. Sometimes you get really messy answers, and so how can you find those answers? We're going to use what we call the quadratic formula. And so this is it right here. It's looks kind of scary, but it's okay. All we're going to be doing is plugging our values in and then using order of operations to simplify. Um, so where did this come from? They started with a quadratic in standard form. Okay. This is what the standard form of a quadratic equation looks like. And they did about 12 math steps to pulling those X's out and isolating it to get to there. So I will not bore you with all of the techniques they've used to kind of to manipulate that and to isolate that X, but just know what they did was they moved everything else over with lots of cool little tricks, and they ended up with this: X equals negative B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC all over 2A. Okay, so step one, you're always going to want to make sure that your quadratic is in standard form before you begin this technique. So that means you have the x squared, the x, the constant, and then it's solved for 0. That's what it means to be in standard form. All right, next what we want to do is we want to identify our a, b, and c. So the a is that coefficient in front of your x term, which here it's 1. Okay, so my a is 1. All right, and so what is b? B is the coefficient in front of your x term, -5. So my b is -5. And what's my c? My c is my constant term. So you notice, guys, when I'm identifying my a, b, and c, I'm making sure that if there's a minus sign, that that number is negative, okay? All right, so I identified my A, B, and C. Now what's left to do is to plug it into my formula, okay? So my formula looks like this. I've got X equals negative B, all right, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC, oops, 4AC, all over top of, oops, oh, let me do that one more time, all over top of 2A. All right, and I kind of color coded it because I think whenever we have a really crazy formula, it's nice to be able to see those colors and see what numbers we have to plug in there. So the couple things that you want to be careful with when you're plugging values in is always be careful with plugging in negative values, okay? So be careful plugging in negative values, and then also be careful that you're not disrupting any sort of multiplication, right? Because multiplication, if it's written with variables, you don't have to write a symbol, right? You don't have to write the time symbol or parentheses or anything like that. If it's 4AC, you can just write that. But if I have to multiply 4 times 1 times -36, I need to express that times. So those are two things you really want to be careful for. So let's get to plugging in. So for my B, okay, I'm going to erase the B's. Okay, and I'm going to plug in -5. Okay, that's my B. So be careful. I'm going to plug in -5. Do you notice how now I have a negative and a negative? Okay, that's a really tricky spot. The other thing I want to be careful with is that when you have a negative number that's being raised to an exponent, you have to make sure it's in parentheses or you're not writing it correctly. Okay. All right, next I'll do my A comes up next. So I'll erase those A's. And these are 4 times A and 2 times A. So I need to make sure that I express that multiplication. So I'm just going to put it in parentheses. You could also write the time symbol. You could do lots of other stuff. Okay, then I'm going to erase the C and then I'm going to plug that in. Okay, so negative 36. Once again, that C was being multiplied. Okay, so now we just have to break this down little by little, okay? Let me go ahead and make this a little bit bigger so I have more room. Okay. So good chances are you're going to need an extra sheet of paper for all of this, okay? Um, all right, so let's start simplifying. So what are some things that we can simplify first? So I will definitely want to make sure that this becomes a positive 5, right? Because negative 5 is just a positive 5. All right, and there's that funny plus or minus symbol, guys. This is actually 2 entire equations. One that says 5 plus the square root of blah, 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 and 5 minus the square root of blah, 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 okay? We're going to see that we'll get 2 answers out of this, okay? All right, times the square root. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I'm going to simplify the negative 5 squared and the 4 times 1 times negative 36 all at one go. So negative 5 squared is a positive 25. Okay, negative 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times 36 is a positive 144. Okay. All right, all over, and then I'll simplify this. 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to simplify is 25 plus 144. Now be careful. If this, what was inside of my radical was a product, meaning that there was 2 factors that were being multiplied together, you could individually take the square root of each factor. But this isn't that. This is a addition. This is a sum, okay? So with sums, you can't break those apart like you can with multiplication inside of a radical. So this will be the square root of 169 all over 2. Okay, so the square root of 169, let's look and see what that ends up being. So I want to show you this on a very simple calculator. You don't need anything fancy. Now, chances are on a simple calculator, you have to put the number first, 169, and then click on that square root button, okay? And so you get 13. Now, some calculators, if it's a little bit nicer, you can hit the square root button first and then punch in the number. So just play with the calculator that you have. I know that every single phone comes with a very standard calculator just like this, so that you should be fine, okay? If not two, you can look one up on Google, just put, standard calculator. Okay, so the square root of 169 is 13, so I'll say x equals 5 plus or minus 13 all over 2. Now, like I said, this is 2 different equations, okay? One of them, and I'm going to go up here because I ran out of room. One of them is x equals 5 plus 13 over 2. And the other one equals 5 minus 13 over 2. Okay, so those are 2 totally different equations. So we'll have to split them apart to find them. So x is either going to be, let's see, 5 plus 13 is 18. 18 divided by 2 is 9. 5 minus 13 gives you a negative 8. Divided by 2 is a negative 4. So x has 2 different answers, positive 9 and negative 4. So since we'll be talking about graphing tomorrow, what does that mean, x being equal to 9 and negative 4? Well, imagine this is, I'm going to do a really rough sketch. All right, what would my quadratic look like? So if this was negative 4 way down here and 9 all the way up there, what would my quadratic equation look like? It would look something along the lines of that. Okay, it's a U shape where it crosses the X and Y axis or the X axis at its 2 points that we call the solutions. Okay, so just a little sneak peek about what we're going to be looking at tomorrow. All right, so the hardest part about this is making sure that you don't trip up on any of those common mistakes with those negative numbers and the multiplication, and then it's the simplifying. So um, I'm going to keep the lesson short today and the homework as well, because I know sometimes it can take a lot of time to do these problems. Okay. All right. Let's look at just a couple on this first page. Okay. All right. On number one, like I said, you have to make sure that it is in standard form. So right now it's not in standard form. I have to subtract 20 from both sides. Okay. So I have x squared minus 8x minus 20 equals 0. Okay, now let's take some time to identify what's my a. Well, my a is that number in front of the x squared term, so it's just 1 since I don't see anything. My b is -8, it's that number in front of my x. And my c is -20. Okay, so what I like to do, especially when I have a very complicated formula, I like to write it all out first. That way I don't make any mistakes plugging things in. But also it's a great way to being able to memorize a formula, to always write the formula out first. I know we don't have to memorize anything in this class, but if you decide to go off to college and you take other math classes, chances are you might have to memorize crazy formulas like this. So rewriting it every single time you do a problem is beneficial to that memorizing process. Okay, x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over top of 2a. All right, so you notice whenever I'm going to replace my b, I don't erase that minus sign, that negative sign, okay? That comes first. I just erase the b. That ensures that I don't accidentally forget an extra minus sign if necessary. So since this b is negative, you see I'm going to have two negative signs right next to each other. And then I'm also going to stick that in parentheses because negatives are very tricky when it comes to square roots. Okay, now let's go for replacing the a's. Okay, so I'm going to erase these a's. Now I'm going to be careful too because that's 4 times a and 2 times a. So I know I'm going to have to draw parentheses to be able to indicate that multiplication. So that's a 1 and that's a 1. All right, and then finally, let's do our c. Our c is -20. Another thing you want to be careful with, guys, is that inside of your radical, the only problems that we're going to be working with are real solutions. So inside of your radical, when you're all done simplifying that, you should end up with a positive number. If you don't, you did something wrong, okay? Um, if you had a negative number inside of your radical, it would lead to a non-real number, which in mathematics we call an imaginary number. So your calculator cannot read imaginary numbers. So make sure that you don't see that. Okay, so we have x equals, so -8 is just an 8 plus or minus the square root. Remember, a negative times a negative always gives you a positive. Okay, -8 times -8 is a positive 64. And then even here, you have -4 times -20. That's going to give you a positive 80. So those are two places that you might accidentally mistaken your answer as a negative number. Okay, 2 times 1 is 2. So I just went through and I simplified any of the multiplying and the exponents. Now let's go ahead and add the numbers inside of my radical. So I have x equals 8 plus or minus the square root of 144 all over 2. Okay, so inside of my radical is positive. Good, because if it was not, I think I would have done something wrong because I'm telling you that we're not covering imaginary numbers. So always make sure that inside of the radical ends with a positive number. Okay, so what is the square root of 144? You can pull out your calculator. You can pull out that nifty list that we had at the beginning. The square root of 144 is 12. Okay, you notice I don't write the radical anymore. So this is two totally different answers. I have x equals 8 plus 12 divided by 2, and x equals 8 minus 12 divided by 2. Okay, so here you get 8 plus 12 is 20, divided by 2 is 10. X equals 8 minus 12 is a negative 4, divided by 2 is a negative 2. Okay, so one thing that can help while you're working problems out like these is to make sure you're just writing everything down very neatly. I know some people try and skip steps or do some stuff in their heads, but while you're learning, make sure that you're doing this slowly. So, number two, I'm going to let number two be for you, but I'm going to give you a hint first. Make sure you subtract those 12s. Okay, so that you're left with 2x squared plus 7x minus 9 equals 0. Okay, 2 is your A, positive 7 is your B, negative 9 is your C. Okay, so let's look at number three. This one's written a little bit differently. If you notice, I have my x squared term and my constant term, but where is that x term? Okay, well, think about this, guys. Could I say 3x squared plus 0x minus 12 equals 0? Does that change my problem at all? Did that change the value? All I did was add 0x. Well, what's 0 times any number? It's just 0. So all I did to rewrite this problem was add 0, and adding 0 doesn't change anything. So I rewrote it this way so that we can clearly see what my b is. Now, in the future, you may just be able to gather and to conclude that my b must be 0. Okay, so my a is 3. Okay, my a is 3, my b is 0, and then my c is negative 12. Okay, oops, this is my c. My B, my C. Okay, so I identified my A, B, and C. Now let's write it out. So I have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, so let's replace my b's. These are going to be easy because they're just 0. Okay, and now let's replace my a's. My a is 3 multiplying by 3, right? And then my C is a negative 12. All right, so here we end up with x equals, well, this is 0 plus or minus the square root of 0. 4 times 3, negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. Negative 12 times negative 12 is a positive 144 all over top of 6. So this is x equal, well, 0 plus or minus anything is just still going to be, we're just going to have a positive or negative square root of 0 plus 144 is 144 all over 6. So we're going to end up with x equals a plus or minus, the square root of 144 is 12 all over 6. So we have x equals a positive 12 over 6. And x equals a negative 12 over 6. And so x equals 2 or x equals negative 2. Okay, so I'm going to leave let's go ahead and do this one. I'll leave number 4 for you guys. Okay, now after you move this 6 over, right? Subtract 6. You can subtract it from that 15x. X squared plus 9x equals 0. Your A is 1, right? That's your A. Your B is 9. What's your C? Okay, plus 0, right? Your C is going to be a 0, all right? So I'll leave 4 for you. Okay, so let's go ahead. We're going to skip 5, 6, 7, and 8, okay? We're going to look at what solutions that are irrational. Irrational solutions are just solutions that are decimal numbers and very crazy decimal numbers. They're decimal numbers that never, never end. So there's going to be two ways to expressing a solution that's irrational. And Alex will have you do it both ways. One way they will say to simplify, okay? To just simplify. All right. And then the other way will be to round to the nearest, I don't know, maybe they say 100th. I'm not really sure what they say, if it's 100th or 10th place or whatever it is, but round to the nearest. So one of the answers, they'll say simplify your answer. One of them will say round. When they say simplify, they want you to just keep with your radical, okay? Keep it with the radical. And I think problems 1 through 3 say to simplify. So you're gonna keep your answer with the radical in it. And then 4 and 5 say to round. So you're going to compute exact answer. Oh, you know what they do say? Sorry, it's not simplify. They say exact answer. Okay, so if they say an exact answer, they want you to keep the radical. If they say round to the nearest 100th, they want you to compute it and to estimate. Okay, and I'll show you what the difference is. So let's say the first one we do this. Let's say the first one we just write it as an exact answer. Okay, so on number 9, we're going to write ours as an exact answer. Okay. So with irrational solutions, if you want to express it exactly, you're not going to be able to put it down to a decimal because irrational solutions, the decimal goes on forever and ever and ever, and we don't have that much time. So we're going to, if we want to write it exact, we have to keep things such as square roots inside of our answer. So identify your A, B, and C. Your A is 1, your B is positive 4, and your C is 1. So we have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so x equals, so negative b, that's negative b is 4, so 4, plus or minus the square root. 4 squared is 16, okay, minus, let's see, 4 times 1 is just 4, and then 4 times 1 is still just 4, so my answer is going to be 4. And then 2a is 2 times 1, which is just 2. Okay, now there I did skip a step. Okay, so if you feel confident with some of that, you can go ahead and solve some of those simple problems as you write them down, but be careful with that, okay? So x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 12 all over top of 2. All right, guys, now this is the answer in exact form. Now, I don't think that Alex has this button though, so you'll have to write it in 2 separate ones. You'll have to say x equals negative 4 plus the square root of 12 all over 2, and x equals negative 4 minus the square root of 12 all over 2. Okay, so you see the 2 different ways, the 2 different answers that are that you have to write, the plus and the minus in that equation. Okay. All right, so this was if you wanted to write it as an exact answer. Let's write it in round. Okay, so what do you have to do when it says to round your answer? So first, as always, it's in standard form. Let's go ahead and identify what's my A, what's my B, what's my C. Okay, I'll write it out. X equals, let's see, negative B. That's going to be a negative, -2. So that'll be a +2 plus or minus the square root. Let's see, -2 squared, right? B squared. That's going to give me 4 minus 4 times -1 is -4. -4 times 7 is -28. So minus a -28 is the same as plus 28. All over 2 times -1 is -2. Okay? Now, do not do that in your head if you're not comfortable with that. Write it out. It doesn't take very long. 2 plus or minus the square root of 32 all over -2. Okay, so we don't know what the square root of 32 is. All right, that's not a perfect square. And since this one, I'm going to say they wanted you to estimate or to round. That's what they'll say in Alex. They'll say round. And we'll say to the nearest hundredth spot. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to have to use our calculator. So I got to figure out what is the square root of 32. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I write 32 and then click that square root button. All right, so I've got 5.6568. Okay, so 5.6568. Let's go ahead and write that down. So 5.6568, and I think it was 5 all over -2. All right, so we'll finish this problem off. We'll first add 2 and subtract 2. So X will either be 2 plus 5.658, so that'll be 7.65685 divided by -2. And then also X minus that, so that'll be X equals -3.65685. Okay, I'm just adding and subtracting that 2 divided by -2. And then just use the calculator. So I'll pull that back up. And it's nice if you still have that number pulled up. Okay, you've got that number. All you have to hit is divided by -2. Okay. Oh, got rid of that negative sign. So it'll be a -2.828. So we got to round, so it'll be -2.83. -2.83. So X equals -2.83, or X equals, oh, you know what? I think I had that wrong because I didn't divide it by, I'm sorry, guys. We did that wrong, or I did that wrong. It was 7.65685 divided by the 2. That's your answer, -3.83, -3.83. So be careful with your calculator, -3.83. And then here you'll have your -3.65685 divided by 2 -1.83. So X equals 1.83. It takes a little bit more work to get it down to the exact or to an estimated answer. So just take your time with it. All right. I think that'll be it for the notes. If you need any help on the Alex assignment, just let me know.